Talking Teen Treatment. Talking Teen Treatment is presented by Muirwood Adolescent and Family Services. Muirwood is a residential treatment program for teens 12 through 17 who are struggling with mental health issues and substance use disorders. We're located throughout California. Today, our guest is Erica Komisar. Erica is a licensed clinical social worker, a coach, a psychoanalyst, and the author of the book, Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety, which obviously begs the question, what is this new age of anxiety? And if you would, talk about that a bit and, tell us why you wrote the book.
Well, 1 in 5 children will not exit childhood and adolescence without some severe mental health issue. And so by labeling it the new age of anxiety, it is basically identifying that we have an epidemic of anxiety, depression, attentional issues, behavioral issues that is on a scale that we've never seen before in history. And although some people might come back and say, isn't it just that we can identify it more? And the answer is, of course, it's that we identify it more, but it's also that there's more of it to identify.
Yeah, great. So tell us a bit about the book and what inspired you to write it.
So, basically, I've written 2 books as of now, and they're both about the 2 critical periods of brain development, 0 to 3, and the second book, Chicken Little, is really about adolescence, which is 9 to 25. And we call these two periods critical periods of brain development because the right brain, or the social emotional part of the brain, is developing in these 2 periods. In the first period of 0 to 3, there's a lot of what we call neurogenesis, a lot of cell growth. And you could say by 85% of the right brain is developed by the end of the 3rd year of life. And you basically have an excess of cells. And so then adolescence is a pruning and reorganizing period of development. And interestingly, a lot of the same things are happening in these 2 periods. Most importantly, these 2 periods are very sensitive to the environment. Meaning the environment has a great deal to do with whether your child develops in a healthy manner and whether their right brain develops in a healthy manner. And so, so these 2 periods of 0 to 3 and 9 to 25 have a great deal in common. But that's why I wrote the second book, to help parents understand that they are a good part of their children's environment, and they matter greatly in terms of whether their children exit adolescence in a resilient and mentally healthy state.
Okay. According to most of the reliable statistics that are out there, there's a 31% prevalence of anxiety among the adolescent population, but only 18% are receiving some sort of treatment. What do you think is driving that 13% gap?
Well, and also, you're saying, 30% or 39%, those are the ones that are recorded. So, we're really only recording what is more obvious to us. We're not seeing all the kids who are suffering, who we haven't recorded. So I would say it's probably higher. The number that are treated is not higher, but the number that are suffering is higher. So just to say that, I think that there's just not enough clinicians, and there's not enough resources to really meet all the needs of the kids who are suffering right now. And I think it's really hard. It's painful for me as a therapist who refers to other therapists, who refers families every day. It's painful for me to see this discrepancy between the number of kids and adolescents who are suffering and parents who are suffering, because they say, a parent is only as happy as their least happy child. So parents are also suffering because they see their children suffering. And oftentimes there's 3-month wait lists for services for children. And a lot of those services are not even the correct services. It's sort of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing if it sticks. And so, to say that I'm critical of the way our system works is an understatement.
there's also a gap between girls and boys. So girls more anxiety and depression and everything
Mm-hmm.
else. Girls versus boys. So we see that gap, but how does it present differently in adolescent girls versus boys? Anxiety.
Well, so boys and girls have different issues, just to say. Boys suffer from more attentional issues, and that has a lot to do with the way that we are raising boys. I would say that uh, we have unrealistic expectations of boys. Boys' brains are much more sensitive, according to research, than girls to stress. They're much more sensitive to cortisol. And it's why more boys are born in the world, but more girls survive. Boys are actually more sensitive to stress than girls. Having said that, so boys do suffer from more impulse disorders and a distractibility. Notice I don't call it ADHD. Notice I call it distractibility because, again, ADHD is labeling a symptom as a disorder. A symptom is not a disorder. A symptom is a symptom. And girls suffer more from anxiety because there is a great deal of amygdala activity, which is the stress regulating part of the brain in adolescence, and it's very hot in girls, and it causes them to be incredibly vigilant to criticism, very susceptible to an environment where things like social media and technological bullying and girls were already very self-conscious and susceptible to criticism, but it's sort of amplified what was already happening. So girls are very sensitive to any kind of hurts or rejections or criticism. So again, social media and technology has amped that up.
Sure.
But boys and girls do suffer. They just suffer from different kinds of disorders at greater rates.
Okay. Um, so going back to your book offers practical tools for parents to
Mm-hmm.
prevent, identify, and address anxiety, depression, substance use disorder, and the like. Talk a bit about those tools and what can parents do to alleviate some of these conditions.
Be as present as possible. People misunderstand adolescence to mean that they are less needed, and they're just as needed as when your child was small, but in a different way. In the book, I write, when the door opens and you're there, and I mean literally when their door opens, but also when their emotions allow you in, when their defenses are down. If you happen to be there, they'll process their day with you, which they still tremendously need from you. They need you to help them to regulate their emotions and make sense of their experiences and put things in order in their minds. And so if you're there when the door opens, then they process things with you. If you're not there, they go back inside and shut the door. And just because you come home at 7 or 8 o'clock at night from work and you knock on their door, that doesn't mean that they'll talk to you. And so what I say to parents is, if you really want to have an influence on your child, and no one can be there all the time, and that's not the point, but be there as much as possible, physically as well as emotionally, just as you were when they were little.
Great. Um, studies also show that anxiety in children and adolescents is a fairly good predictor of anxiety and other mental health issues on into young adulthood and into adulthood. So in my mind, that would indicate that we need longer term approaches to identifying, treating these disorders. What might long term approaches look like?
Well, long-term approaches would be educators, because usually the people on the first line of defense are teachers, preschool teachers, dare I say daycare workers. I'm not a fan of daycare. If you've read my books, you know that I'm really not a fan of daycare, but and pediatricians, there are people that are sort of on the first line of defense who can help to identify that there are issues. without overly diagnosing children, but by just identifying signs. As a therapist, we always say, what are the signs and symptoms? We don't label that as disorders. And I think there's a quickness to jump to, particularly in preschools. Oh, your little boy is distractible. They have ADHD. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Your child is struggling with some distractibility. It actually may be normal because little boys are distractible and need a lot of physical release. So, but it also could be that there's stress at home, and you need to look at that. So, really educating the first line of defense workers, and also educating parents. Parents really need to go into parenting very well versed and educated. They have to be consumers rather than just listening to the professionals around them, because I think it can be very confusing when a pediatrician who doesn't have a very deep knowledge of development but is very behavioral says to you, yes, of course your child has ADHD. We'll just medicate them and it'll be fine. As opposed to saying, you know what, your child is showing some signs that they're under stress. Why don't you go talk to this child therapist or adolescent therapist, and they can help sort it out and see if there's some underlying causes that are really causing some of these symptoms to occur. So I think really, being a consumer, I think is really important, that you as a parent have a deep understanding that children's behavior, children's symptoms and signs express stress. And then you have to, like a good sleuth or epidemiologist, have to try to understand deeply what may be causing that stress.
Are there, what sort of assessment tools are available to parents that will give kind of self-reporting sort of thing for kids? Are there tools that are available to parents? We know that the mask and the revised mask, those are available to primary care people, but what's available to a parent?
Well, I mean, I hope my books help with that, because each of the books has a diagnostic chapter in it, and it's not diagnosing them in terms of saying you have ADHD, you have depression, but helping parents to at least understand what those terms mean so they can make sense of them, but also offer alternative treatment options. Meaning, if you go to most, as I said, pediatricians and educators, they want the quickest way to relieve symptoms because they think that's what parents want. Parents come and they say, fix my child. And they say, right, we'll fix your child. Let's put them on some meds and we'll fix the symptoms. So I think one thing that's really important is that we get away from that mindset. And one resource that we don't offer, before they get to you, Pat, one resource that parents don't know about is that every psychoanalytic institute in America, and there are many, 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 many. So psychoanalysis is the terminal degree in our clinical field. It's the deepest understanding of human behavior and the human psyche that and the deepest training you can have, right? That doesn't mean that psychoanalysts don't also use some behavioral methods when necessary, but they have a frame of reference that takes the whole person and the whole history of the person into consideration. Psychoanalytic institutes have low-fee referral services. They have referral services, and people don't know that you can go to a psychoanalytic institute and you can get a very well-trained or therapist in training who's training to be a psychoanalyst, who's already very experienced as a therapist. You can get a therapist for as low as $35 in some places. People don't know about them. So that would be the first thing I would say is, be a consumer, turn to the psychoanalytic institutes, turn to talk therapy and play therapy first before you go to a psychiatrist. Don't go to a psychiatrist first. A psychiatrist is the end of the road when all else has failed, unless your child is in crisis. If your child is suicidal, you should take them to an emergency room. If your child is bipolar or schizophrenic, yes, they have to be medicated. But if your child is saying, I feel a little bit depressed or a little bit anxious, don't rush them to a psychiatrist, because they are not the best option for you in that case. The best option is to go to someone who can help you sort through the underlying causes.
Great. What is your hope for the book? What do you hope the book accomplishes?
What I hope is that it educates parents because, as I said, you can never have too much education. And the more you know, the more equipped you'll be to deal with any situation. You know, people pick up my books and they want to just read the chapters that apply to them then. And I say, read the whole book because you never know what you'll learn by thinking about your child as a whole from the beginning to where they are now. And they may never have any of these signs or symptoms, but it's always good to be prepared. So don't just grab for a book like one of my books when you are in trouble. Read it preventatively. Read the first one preventatively if you have young children or grandchildren. Read the other book that on adolescence if your child is starting to enter adolescence, so you can be prepared. So you can do things like be less judgmental of your child. So you can understand how you allow your child to be separate from you rather than in the mirror image of you, which allows them to be their true self. And, just little things that might help you along your path.
Great. Erica, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate the time you took to do this. Erica Komisar is a licensed clinical social worker, a coach, a psychoanalyst, and the author of the book Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. You can get Erica's books, plural, on Amazon and anywhere else that you buy your books. And thanks again for joining us, and have a fantastic weekend.